In our last lecture, we started to discuss evolutionary psychology and how the findings done in evolutionary psychology can benefit personality psychologists. So how can we study personality based on the intersection between evolutionary psychology and personality psychology? So we discussed premises of evolutionary psychology. And in this video, we need to discuss the main findings of evolutionary psychology, which would be applicable for personality psychology. So one of the key findings is connected to so-called need to belong. For example, Robert Hogan, in his research done pretty long ago in 1980s, argues that the most basic human motivators, like needs, are status and acceptance by the group. It definitely has its foundations. So as we discussed in previous videos, evolutionary psychologists try to imagine the environment people lived approximately 200,000 years ago when Homo sapiens emerged as a species, as an independent species in the Homo branch. And based on the environment and lifestyle people had back then, they try to consider different psychological mental processes, functions, and as adaptations to that environment we had so long ago when we emerged as a species. And early people lived as hunters and gatherers. They didn't know agriculture for a long time. And they lived in small communities, small tribes of people, which were like approximately between 30 and 100 people in each tribe. People tried to get along within the tribe, but were extremely hostile toward other groups of people. The same as our close relatives, for example, chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are extremely aggressive toward any other group of chimpanzees they encounter. It often ends up with small genocidal war. So people were very similar to chimpanzees, our relatives, genetic relatives, and were extremely hostile. People couldn't survive alone as we can in our modern day society. So in a modern day society, you, for example, can work alone from home, order all your groceries using your credit card, get delivered to home, and you can survive completely fine without even leaving your house or apartment. But long ago, people couldn't survive alone, and their whole life was dependent on the relationships within their group, within their tribe. So according to Hogan, the most important social problems early people, early humans had to solve was establishing cooperative relationships with other group members and negotiating certain type of hierarchy. We actually don't know that much about the customs of ancient people because we make some guess and speculations based on artifacts and archaeological findings we have, but they not often very clearly show us how the communication was working. And we don't have any written sources of information as well, because writing was invented so much later. So it's a field for speculation, but definitely we can compare the life of early people with life of our close genetic relatives. As I already mentioned, chimpanzees. It might be chimpanzees bonobo, gorillas, and other apes. And we know that for all those genetically close to us species, relationships within community and hierarchy is very important, and other apes form a strong hierarchical order in their groups. So achieving some sort of status and popularity within your group uh, probably was really relevant for survival, because if you're popular, if other group members like you have higher chances to get additional food, desirable mates, and protection. On the other hand, people who were much lower, had lower position in this hierarchy, risk to face hostile attitude towards from their group members, sorry, and get less food, less help, less protection, and obviously they were less desirable mates, and thus their reproductive success was significantly lower. On this basis, Roy Baumeister and Diana Tice proposed a hypothesis that social anxiety might originate in this as an evolutionary adaptation. So our ancient ancestors experienced social anxiety, and it was adaptive because if you feel that you're going down into social hierarchy and the group accepts you less, you should be afraid, you should feel anxiety, and you should do something extremely fast, because your whole survival and reproduction depends on that. In a modern-day society, of course, social anxiety doesn't serve this purpose anymore, because your survival and reproduction success much less dependent on your communication within small community of people you personally know. And advancements of our civilization allow you to feel safe because we have police forces, for example, and army to defend you, and you not necessarily need to be popular to survive, but we already got this evolutionary adaptation. It doesn't suit our current environment, but it was highly adaptive 200,000 years ago. Baumeister and his another colleague Leary suppose that belonging to a certain group of people, evolutionary speaking, had key adaptive functions for any individual within those groups. So groups can share food, information, and other resources, right? So survival chances to survive with a group of people much higher. For example, you tried to gather some mushrooms and berries today, you wasn't lucky, but other group members found some food and they share it with you because they know that tomorrow situation can be quite an opposite and you might find something and they don't, so you share this. Group shares information about different geographical objects, for example, where is the source of water, where is the source of food, where is a possible danger. So information is also important. Different group members gather different pieces of information which they can share, and other resources, anything you can imagine. So groups can offer protection from external threat, right? So if a group encounters wild animals and beasts or another group, again, your chances of survival alone are close to zero. So fighting together and protecting each other was a key essence of survival. And of course, group was important for that. Group contain concentration of mates, which needed for reproduction, right? So if you do not belong to a group, where you will find other people. So I need to remind you that the overall population of people across the globe was very, very low when we emerged as a species. So it's several hundreds of thousands of people. So population grew very slowly because before invention of agriculture, the main problem was just the sources of food for survival. So the overall population was very, very low, and your chances to find another human being without belonging to a certain group were quite low. Also because all the other groups were hunters and gatherers, constantly moving across wide spaces. So again, reproduction was almost impossible. And the final one, groups usually contain kin, which people provide opportunities to receive altruism and to invest in genetic relatives. So because people usually reproduce within their small group, a lot of group members were their relatives with different degree of kinship. But again, if you help them, you're not only just making something good, you also help your genes to survive. All right? In the last video, we discussed inclusive fitness theory, and the idea that you can help your genes to survive not only when you take care of your kids, but also when you take care of kids of your relatives, for example, your siblings' children, when you're an aunt or an uncle, and it increases overall chances of your genes' survival, even if you don't have your own kids. So groups help to achieve this purpose. Eugene Bernstein put forward hypothesis that helping others is a direct function of the recipient's ability to enhance the inclusive fitness of the helpers, right? So we're returning back to this idea of inclusive fitness theory, that you not always have a direct descendants, but you might also have indirect descendants, your relatives of different degree of kinship. And altruism probably evolutionary originated from our intention to help our close relatives to increase chances of our genes to survival. So it wasn't like full altruism, it was a bit different. Bernstein and his colleagues predicted that people should help younger relatives more often and better than older relatives because it has more impact on survival, right? So if you help children, they will grow up and will have their own children. But if you help elderly people, they won't reproduce in future, and thus their evolutionary value for the tribe or group of people is lower. According to modern ethical standards, this statement sounds wild and cruel, but 200,000 years ago, again, people didn't invent ethics yet, and they were mainly concerned with survival. So biologically speaking, this statement might be true. So I remind you that it is a hypothesis. So another hypothesis of Eugene Bernstein was that individuals of higher reproductive value should be helped more often than individuals of lower reproductive value. So it might be connected with sex, age, and health conditions, right? So the hypothesis is that people would help more often more healthy younger people because they have higher chances to reproduce and thus secure survival of the group, and helping less elderly people with a lot of health problems. Again, sounds unethical by modern standard, but biologically speaking, this might be the case. So in this perspective, evolutionary psychology perspective, altruism originates from the biological need of survival and reproduction, and only after cultural development we had in recent millennia, people developed ability to help other people who not related to them genetically and develop different ethical standards, but it's a cultural advancement, not biological. So initially, as a species, we're prone to do that. Another part of human nature is so-called universal emotions. So all people across the world experience and express emotions. It's not a secret, right? So There are some cultural variations in expression of certain emotions, though most of basic emotions surprisingly expressed and experienced the same way in all countries all over the world. Uh, it was noticed by famous psychologist Paul Ekman, who introduced the theory of universal emotions. So Ekman collected tremendous amount of photos and videos of people experiencing emotions all over the world, trying to find typical patterns. And he came to the conclusion that there are 6 basic emotions which people express almost the same way all over the world, including some it's so-called basic emotions, including happiness, anger, disgust, sadness, fear, right? So, and surprise. So, according to this perspective, um, if all people have the same basic emotions, those emotions can be considered as an adaptation, which help people to survive. Thus, all people have this feature of expressing emotions. So why emotions can be adaptive? Because emotions can be considered as adaptive mechanism because they're help to reinforce useful behavior. For example, you experience pleasure and happiness when you achieve your goals. For example, your status within the group rises and you feel happy about that. And also emotions help us to avoid dangerous situations. So you experience negative emotions when something bad can possibly happen to you or happened, and you try to avoid those situations. For example, you don't like to be beaten up, right? So you will try to avoid this situation um, if possible, right? And thus emotions help to reinforce useful reactions, which help to survive and reproduce, and punish reactions which are opposite. And finally, emotions also help in communication. So because all emotions have this expressive component, which we can directly observe through mimic reactions, posture, paralanguage, gestures, and so on. Expressing emotions help in the communication. It makes communication much more effective, communication between people. So, for example, if you threat someone, uh, the threat would be more realistic if you show the emotion of anger you have. So threatening other people and showing anger helped our ancestors not to involve in a physical fight if possible, right? And increased chances for survival. Of course, in modern society, threatening other people and openly showing anger probably won't provide you with much profit. You probably will be socially penalized for that because it's considered to be dangerous and offensive. But 200,000 years ago, a threat which could replace a physical fight could save your life. So it was highly adaptive, but it's one of the examples of how expression of emotion can help into communication and make it more adaptive. So based on all those ideas, we can consider universal emotions people experience and express as some sort of evolutionary adaptation we got from our ancestors because it helped survival and reproduction of people all over the world. There are also sex differences. So, and it's an interesting question because evolutionary psychologists tried to explain why we have sex differences. So, and it's a topic of hot debate. So, gender studies and sex differences studies are a field which actively develops in recent decades, coming to very different results. So there is a huge debate about the origin of sex differences, what sex difference we actually have, how they depend on biology and genetics, and how much they depend on social factors and culture. So in this sense, evolutionary perspective on studying sexual differences can be and must be debatable. So it's a small disclaimer before we will consider the main ideas of this research perspective. So evolutionary psychology predicts that males and females will be the same, so they won't have much differences, in domains in which the sexes have faced the same or similar adaptive problems, but they will be different in domains where they faced different evolutionary problems. So evolutionary psychology puts forward hypothesis that the main differences would be connected with pregnancy, mating, and nurturing children, right? So, and because evolutionary speaking, men and women faced this reproduction cycle in different conditions, they developed different mechanisms, personality traits, and characteristics to deal with that. So this is the main hypothesis, that we won't observe any sex differences in the domains and fields where we solved, our ancestors, female and male ancestors, solved identical tasks, but in the fields where they tried to solve different tasks and were presented to different challenges, there will be strong gender differences. The modern evolutionary psychology states that the strongest sex differences are observed in expression of aggression. So many research projects show that men more prone to expressing physical aggression, while women more prone to experiencing verbal aggression, with overall almost the same level of aggression in general. Jealousy is an interesting topic. So the idea of evolutionary psychologists was that men and women would experience and express jealousy different way because they have different mating and reproduction strategies. Though I consider this highly speculative idea about how they build relationships, because we get very controversial information about how people actually were organized socially and how they actually raise children. So you should be careful considering research in this area. Sexual variety is also connected with the mating strategies. So evolutionary psychologists speculate that men were more interested in having more offspring because they're not invest that much in nurturing children. So, and it's much easier to father a child than to give birth and raise it. So men were interested in having more sexual relationships and getting more children, while women, because it's really hard to give a birth, it's a risk for health, and after that you need to raise a child, which also was quite a challenge in ancient times, given sparse sources of food and a lot of danger. They tried to have less sexual partners and relationships, investing into increasing chances of their children to survive. Though it's also, as I said, highly speculative, because we also have some evidence that in early days of humanity, people didn't see connection between the sexual act and giving birth to children, because they separated by 9 months of waiting. And people for many thousands of years couldn't understand the connection between the sexual act and giving birth to children. And they just consider all children within the group or tribe as common shared children, and they all shared custody, trying to help, and all children were like all adults were their parents, so it was a very different type of relationships. And only after people discovered the connection between sexual act and giving birth to children, it changed completely the whole model of relationships within early societies. So it's a subject for speculation. And finally, mate preferences. So whom men would consider as an attractive mate, and whom women will consider as an attractive mate. Which factors would be more important for them? So also a subject of wild speculation about how much factors of physical attractiveness matter for men and women, how much factors of health conditions important for men and women. And unfortunately, in this field, the huge problem is the modern cultural biases scientists have. One very simple example I can provide you with is, for decades, scientists were completely sure that the hunt was completely male type of activity. So males were breadwinners, hunting the mammoths, and so on, and that women were only involved in gathering, while men were involved in hunting. And even when they find a lot of skeletons of women hunters, they misinterpreted these findings, still considering these skeletons as a male skeletons. But later, further investigation showed that no, women also participated in hunting as well as men. And this is just a gender stereotype from 1950s. And actually, men were also involved in the gathering. And even more than that, gathering was more reliable source of food compared to hunt. Hunt was dangerous and reliable, and a lot of people could get injured during the hunt. So actually, women support a tribe with higher amount of foods than average. So this is how modern cultural bias can affect findings in this field. And I'm afraid that a lot of research done in evolutionary psychology about sex differences right now suffers from the same problem, but we will discuss it a bit later when we finish and start discussing limitations of evolutionary psychology. So individual differences also can be explained in terms of evolutionary psychology. And again, the idea is that everything you have as a part of your individuality could be adaptive for your ancestors. So all personality traits and dispositions you have were adaptive at a certain period of human history and have evolutionary value for your ancestors. So evolutionary framework also tries to answer a very interesting question. Why do we even have those individual differences, right? So we can possibly imagine that people could have less individual differences or no individual differences at all. So why do we even have those? And probably we have those because we faced different types of tasks, and people develop different mechanisms of solving those tasks. And some of those mechanisms were effective in certain environments, while in other environments, another mechanisms were more effective. So, and basically, this leads to idea of so-called frequency-dependent selection. So this idea is based on that your mechanisms you have genetically might be adaptive or disadaptive based on how many other people utilize the same strategy as you do. Because if everyone does the same, they start to compete with each other, and this strategy becomes less successful, right? So there is a frequency-dependent selection, because if you possess some adaptation which is unique, you become more preferable as a mate, and you're very successful compared to other people. But if everyone does the same, value of your adaptation you have decreases because everyone has that, and you become less desirable mate. So in this frequency regulates itself based on how many other people in your group and population share the same adaptive mechanisms or traits. So based on this idea, there are several smaller theories explaining individual differences. For example, one theory proposed by Bielski, Steinberg, and Draper, critical event for people informing certain types of behavior is absence or presence of father. So they have a conjecture that children who grow up in a father-absent homes during the first years of their life develop expectations that parental resources will be not very reliable and not very predictable. So again, in modern society, we have social support and different programs and benefits for single mother or single father families. But evolutionarily speaking, it was not the case. So raising children without father was more risky in terms of just getting food, protection, and shelter. So this idea speculates on that children who had less resources because of absence of father develop different sexual strategies when they grow up, and individuals who lacked father cultivate a sexual strategy marked by early sexual maturation, early sexual initiation, and frequent partner changing, just to maximize the number of offspring you have, right? So starting to have sex early with more people, changing sexual partners more often to have more children, right? And increased chances of survival. On the other hand, people who had a father and had more reliable resources in early days of life developed an opposite strategy of mating based on long-term relationships, and they don't like to change partners and invest heavily into children, increasing the chances of survival of smaller amount of children compared to the first strategy, which maximizes the amount of offspring without concern about what's happening. So again, this theory also can be debated based on what we already discussed. For example, that in early days of humanity, people didn't see connection between giving birth to children and sexual act, and that probably a group of people would take care of all children equally. So such a hypothesis can be criticized on the different bases, but it's an interesting conjecture, right? So definitely worth checking into research. Another collective of researchers led by Gangenstad and his colleagues have another conjecture that women mating strategies should be centered on two key qualities of potential mates. So that if women seeking in a high investing mate, so they try to choose a male based on their commitment to relationships, they adopt restricted sexual strategy. So they would like to see a prolonged courtship to see that the man is really committed and strong-willed, and only after that they come to sexual relationships because they want to find a mate who is more committed and more invested into raising children. Alternative strategy is like unrestricted mating strategy, is based on the situation when woman wants to find a man who has desirable genes. She's not interested in getting much help in raising children. She just wants to get good genes from a father. In this case, there is not much sense in delaying sexual relationships, right? So in this strategy, sex happens early just to get those desirable genes. Again, highly speculative idea. So I personally don't think it worked that way, but again, it's an interesting example of research in evolutionary psychology, which I wanted to share with you. So again, what do you think about that? You might have different ideas, which would be interesting for further discussion. Another example of frequency-dependent strategies is so-called psychopathy. So it's a set of individual traits marked by irresponsible, unreliable behavior, egocentrism, impulsivity, and inability to form long-lasting relationships, superficial social charm and manipulation, and deficit of social emotions, including empathy. So the strategy is based on deceiving other people, right? So in case of like real true collaboration, both sides, both people invest something into their relationships. So, but some people, evolutionary, developed this set of traits. So why you need to invest if you can trick another person into investing something in relationship, taking that and then just disappearing, right? So why do you need to put your own efforts here if you can trick other people to share their resources and invest in relationships and just don't give anything in return, right? It also can be adaptive, though we consider this as an unethical strategy, but it can be working. But the problem is how many such people with this trait we have in the group of people. Because if you have few of them, other people not aware about existence of such strategy. So people trust them because they don't suspect any trick. But if there are a lot of such people, other people know that they exist, they don't trust each other or trust less and try to find more reliable people. And this strategy stops working. So in this sense, the percentage of people with this psychopathic cluster is regulated. So if there are too many of them, people catch them, they don't have any success, including reproductive success, and their amount in the population decreases up to lower limit where this strategy works. So that's how this frequency-dependent strategy regulates itself. Very interesting hypothesis, so I find it very, very entertaining. So, and another example is individual life history strategy. differences in individual life history strategies. So in this approach, people are divided into two big groups, high K individuals and low K individuals. So this classification is based on how people deal with survival, mating, and parenting. So high K individuals put greater efforts into survival and heavy parenting over idea of getting many sexual partners. So those high K individuals try to form long-lasting relationships based on strong attachment, and they don't like risks. So they would just invest in those relationships in attempt to survive and form a better bond and family, which will help to protect them. So they don't risk for short-term mating, sexual pleasures, and so on. Low-key individuals, on the other hand, have weaker attachments to other people, and they're more willing to take risks. So their strategy is based on short-term mating and mating with more people, having greater number of children, though not investing much into their nurturing. So both strategies can be more or less successful dependent on how many other people use the same strategy. So that's why, like, hypothetically, we have people who utilize both strategies because historically speaking, they were equally effective, but it depends on the environment the group of people you belong to now faces. What comes to Big Five? Again, I remind you that the Big Five is a personality traits taxonomy, which includes 5 personality traits universal for people all over the world, and includes extroversion, agreeableness, openness to new experience, neuroticism, and conscientiousness. So evolutionary psychologists also suppose that differences in those traits are also adaptive. So we have all types of people because for different types of environment, different set of personality traits was more adaptive. It's so-called balancing selection. One simple example, for example, in modern day Canada, people who are high on extroversion, so they're more active and more sociable, high on agreeableness, right? So they negotiate with other people, they're more prone to collaboration and being polite with other people, open to new experience, so they're flexible and adopt new knowledge technologies like multiculturalism and other things, low on neuroticism, so they emotionally stable and calm, don't overthink much, and high on conscientiousness, so they're careful with time, following the rules, highly adaptive. So this set of traits can bring you almost maximal social success in current time. But in other countries and in other times, this set of traits could be actually disadaptive. Because imagine an environment which with much more hostile relationships between people and the times of economic, political, and social turmoil. So everything changes very fast, and being high on conscientiousness doesn't help you because rules change overnight, and actually more impulsive people get an advantage. People who higher on neuroticism anticipate more danger in this troubling time, and they worry a lot, but it helps them to avoid more danger. And people who low on agreeableness and actually can be hostile and aggressive can defend themselves and their interest much better. So in this sense, completely different set of trait can be much more adaptive than the set of trait which I described, which helps to be successful in modern day Canada. So historically speaking, and based on culture and society, different traits could be more and less desirable, creating a certain balance, right, of people. So it affected a different population. One of interesting findings actually is that population of North America, including the United States and Canada, significantly more extroverted compared to the population of Asia. It's an interesting finding, one of the few differences in average Big Five levels across different geographical regions. So how we can explain this difference? Actually, quite easy because both the United States and Canada are filled with immigrants. And historically speaking, the vast majority of population were immigrants. And who will move overseas into completely different country? Probably more extroverted people, because extroverts are willing to take more risks and they're more active, and it helps those people to immigrate. More introverted people, more shy and less willing to take risk, probably will stay at the same region they was born into. So when you have a lot of people with extroversion at the same place, and we know that extroversion is like 50% genetically determined, they give birth to more extroverted children and create more extroverted culture. So probably that's one of the examples of how this balancing selection worked historically. So, and finally, as I promised, limitations of evolutionary psychology. So, as any other research perspective, it has advantages and disadvantages. So, we discussed a lot of interesting findings and perspective on research, which evolutionary psychology provides us with, but there are also limitations. So, the first limitation, adaptations are forged over the long expanse of thousands or even millions of generations. It's huge, huge amount of time. And we cannot go back in time. We don't have a time machine or something to determine with absolute certainty what the precise selective forces on humans have been. So because we cannot teleport back in time, we actually only speculate based on different archaeological findings what the environment was, for example, 200,000 years ago or a million years ago when other Homo species were emerging, Homo sapiens predecessors. So the second limitation is that evolutionary scientists have just started. So it's quite a recent area of study inside of psychology, and we just don't have much information yet. It's also a limitation, obviously. The third limitation is that modern conditions are very different from ancestral conditions. So what was adaptive in the past might be not adaptive in the present. And for us, it's harder to understand what was happening in the past because often it completely contradicts our modern life experiences in terms of ethical standards, views on gender and sex, and other ideas. The fourth limitation is that sometimes, because we speculate, we can have contradictory hypotheses. And because we speculate, we cannot easily figure out which hypothesis is proved right and which one is proved wrong. And finally, evolutionary hypotheses can be untestable or unfalsifiable. It's actually a huge problem. So again, because we cannot check some certain facts about the past and we lack information about different aspects of environment and social interactions between people when we emerge as a species. Sometimes we have hypotheses which we cannot actually test in scientific research, so thus they are unfalsifiable, and that's a problem. And of course, I previously mentioned cultural and sexual biases we have when we put forward Sol's hypothesis, it actually should be included into the list of limitations. So be careful when you read and examine different pieces of research in evolutionary psychology. Thank you.